Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to start with our territory acknowledgement. We acknowledge the lands upon which we are meeting today are the traditional territories of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. We acknowledge that Toronto, a Mohawk word meaning the land where trees stand in the water, is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. These lands are now home to many diverse Indigenous peoples and communities. We are thankful to the people who have since time immemorial cared for Turtle Island, which includes the land we now call Ontario. Acknowledging these traditional Indigenous territories is one way for us to recognize the rights and history of the Indigenous people. It is also a small way for us to work towards dismantling the continued impacts of colonialism and recognize the calls for action for truth and reconciliation. We are all members who share the dish with one spoon, which teaches us to live in these lands with respect, nonviolence, and sustainability. For everyone who is participating virtually in today's webinar, we encourage you to reflect upon the history of the lands upon which you are currently located. So as we are going through the webinar, we encourage you to close all other running applications to help maintain a stable audio and video connection. If your connection freezes, please exit GoToWebinar and then return to the session. The video and slides of this presentation will be posted on CASLPO's website in our international and non-accredited Canadian programs page within the next few weeks. The agenda will include a 5-minute bio break before we start the mentorship section of our presentation. You may enter questions in the questions section of GoToWebinar at any time during the presentation. We will answer questions at the end of the section about registration with CASLPO and again after the section about mentorship. If we don't have time to answer all the questions received prior to or during the presentation, we will answer those questions to GoToWebinar participants following the webinar. We have prepared a few handouts for you that you will find in the handout section of the platform. So today I am presenting to you. My name is Colleen Myrie and I'm the Director of Registration Services. Caitlin?
Hello everyone, my name is Caitlin Reed. I'm the manager of the mentorship program and speech language and pathology practice advisor at CASLPO.
And Sandra.
Hello everyone, my name is Sandra Corte and I'm the international applications coordinator and also a speech language pathology practice advisor.
Wonderful. Also on the line we have our moderator, Jennifer Cupid, and we have some online support. We have Ira Davalos, who is our program assistant, and Vera Ibarra, who is our administrative assistant. So they will be available in the to answer some questions as well. So our presentation has basically these 5 major areas. We're going to be talking about the importance of registration, also the importance of good character. We'll talk briefly about the Canadian Entry to Practice exam and becoming a CASLPO registrant, and also mentorship. And of course, we will have questions. So we start with the importance of registration or licensure. And what is CASLPO? So what is the role of a regulatory body? So our key role is to protect the public from harm. And we do this by ensuring safe and competent practice by setting minimum requirements for clinicians, by upholding professional standards, by establishing and enforcing clear guidelines for ethical practice and conduct, by maintaining quality of practice and continuing competence, by monitoring the quality of professional practice and ensuring registrants remain competent, and addressing complaints, by investigating public concerns and taking appropriate disciplinary action when necessary. So without regulation or registration, the public would be vulnerable to unsafe and incompetent healthcare providers. So for many professions in Canada, regulatory bodies are called colleges. A regulatory college is not an academic institution. The College of Audiologists and Speech-Language Pathologists of Ontario, also known as CASLPO, is a regulatory body for audiologists and speech-language pathologists in the province of Ontario. We provide a number of services, one being registration, that includes new applications. We have the mentorship program, and we also have renewal services. We have a quality assurance program, which includes our self-assessment tool. We call it the SAT, and continuous learning activity credits, which we call CLACs, and we also have peer assessment. We do e-forums, webinars, and other communications and public awareness activities. We have a public professional practice advice team for registrants, and there is inquiries, reports, complaints, and a discipline process. So in Ontario, you must be registered with CASLPO to legally practice audiology and speech-language pathology. Before working in these fields in Ontario, you must be registered with CASLPO and have a CASLPO number. CASLPO is governed by a board of directors, which is composed of professional registrants, both audiologists and speech-language pathologists, registrants from university programs, which we call our academic members, and community appointees and public members, which are appointed by government. The board of directors' role is to serve the public interest by overseeing the regulation of the practice of audiologists and speech-language pathologists in Ontario. So when you become registered with CASLPO, you are joining a company of all the other regulated professionals in the province. For example, nurses, teachers, doctors, lawyers, engineers, etc. There is a difference between CASLPO and a professional organization, and some examples of professional organizations might be SAC, CAA, ASHA, SPA, ISHA, and the Royal College of Speech Language Therapists. So with a regulator, we act in the interest of the public by regulating our registrants. The professional association acts in the interest of the profession. With registration, it's based on legislated criteria, and a professional association accepts members based on the association's determined criteria. Registration is mandatory, while membership with a professional association is voluntary. And while the regulator is accountable to the public and government, in Ontario, it's the Ministry of Health, a professional association is accountable to its members. We have more examples of the differences between a regulator and a professional association available on our website, and the link is in this presentation. So registration with CASLPO provides an individual with the legal authority to use the professional titles in Ontario, such as audiologist, speech language pathologist, or speech therapist, or any abbreviation of that title or variation of these titles. It also allows you to make any representation to the public indicating your qualifications to practice audiology and speech language pathology in Ontario. The college has a document entitled Standard Uses of the Restricted Title, which should be reviewed by applicants before applying for registration with the college. And we have included it as one of our uploaded handouts. This document provides applicants with important information about the accurate use and representation of the restricted titles. So throughout this presentation, we will be providing you with some scenarios to illustrate what we mean by certain standards that the college has. So our first scenario, we have Mia, who has completed her master's degree in speech language pathology at University X and plans to work in Ontario, but she has not completed her registration with CASLPO yet. Mia decides to create the following LinkedIn profile. So Mia has indicated her name, and she is calling herself a speech language pathologist pre-registered in the Ottawa, Canada area. And in the summary, she's included, I am a pre-registered speech language pathologist based in Ontario. I have excellent communication skills and pride myself on my ability to develop a rapport with clients and their families. And I guess the question that we're asking you to think about is the information on Mia's LinkedIn profile acceptable according to college regulations? So the answer to that is no. According to the college regulations, Mia can't use the protected title speech language pathologist or any variation of that title, such as pre-registered SLP. The college takes title infringement very seriously. If we find that Mia has been using the protected title without being registered, her application will be sent to our registration committee for further review of her conduct and to decide if she is fit to practice. While the registration committee is reviewing Mia's file, Mia will not be able to practice as a speech language pathologist until the registration committee has finished the review of her case and made a written decision. It takes approximately 3 to 6 months for the registration committee to complete their review. It may take longer for Mia to start practicing in Ontario if the registration committee decides that more work must be completed before Mia can obtain a certificate of registration. So to avoid any possible problems, it is important to follow the rules by using the restricted title. Please be aware that these rules do not prohibit you from indicating your academic credentials in your resume or LinkedIn, such as if you have a doctorate of audiology or you have a master's degree in speech language pathology or audiology. It's fine to indicate that you have those credentials. However, you cannot call yourself an audiologist or a speech therapist or a speech pathologist. All right, so our next topic is about the importance of good character and what is good character. So good character is defined in our regulation in section 3. So an applicant's past and present conduct must afford reasonable grounds for the belief that the applicant does not have any physical or mental condition or disorder that could affect his or her ability to practice the profession in a safe manner. Will practice the profession with decency, integrity, and honesty and in accordance with the law, and will display an appropriate professional attitude. So that's what we're looking for in the applicant when we consider them to have good character. So we have another scenario for you. We have Minot, who has applied for a certificate of registration in speech-language pathology. After completing her application, she received an email from CASLPO confirming that she is eligible for an initial certificate of registration, pending her completion of the following steps. So completing and signing the registration form, which with a signed undertaking to take the CETP exam at the next available opportunity, and paying the remaining registration fees. So to complete the registration process for the initial certificate, Minot must also have an offer of employment to work as an SLP in Ontario and have a mentor. So Minot is offered an employment and begins working as an SLP on December 9th, 2024, without completing the final steps for registration with CASLPO. On February 1st, 2025, the college receives a call from another SLP who wishes to check if Minot is registered with with CASLPO. The college then receives the remaining paperwork from Minot, and then the college sends Minot a cease and desist notice indicating that Minot has engaged in title infringement. The college then receives a complaint from a parent of a child who was one of the patients that Minot was seeing during this period, and the parent wishes to file a complaint against Minot's supervisor, who is an SLP registered with CASLPO. So Minot's application is referred to CASLPO's registration committee for review to determine if Minot's conduct demonstrated a disregard for the law and the principles of decency, integrity, and honesty that members of the profession are expected to uphold. It's always the responsibility of the applicant to ensure that they are following the rules. Working without registration calls into question the applicant's ability to practice the profession in accordance with the law, and of course the applicant's honesty and integrity and their professional attitude. So you should keep in mind that misconduct before registration may trigger an inquiry into an applicant's suitability to practice. Each applicant or application would be assessed by the registration committee on a case-by-case basis, and the committee would want to know the details of the applicant's conduct before a decision could be made about the registration with the college. All right. So our next section deals with the Canadian Entry to Practice exam for audiology and speech-language pathology. So the Canadian Entry to Practice exam is administered by Speech, Language and Audiology Canada, which is the professional association for audiology and speech-language pathology in Canada, or one of the professional associations. And so they administer the exam. So if you have any questions about exam dates, the cost of the exam, exam enrollment periods, and the exam process, testing accommodations, writing the CETP exam, preparing for the CETP exam, or any study resources that might be available for the CETP exam, you should contact SAC. They have all of that information on their website, or you can contact the CETP manager for assistance as well. Before you write the CETP exam, however, you must confirm your exam eligibility with CASLPO. So if you wish to sit at the next CETP exam setting, you must complete your application package at least 20 weeks before the exam date. That includes providing all of the required supporting documents that are required in the package. If your application package is complete 20 weeks before the next exam date, but it's still under review, you may register for the CETP exam before receiving final confirmation about your eligibility for registration. Once your CASLPO once CASLPO assesses your application and confirms your eligibility to take the CETP exam, CASLPO will notify SAC. If you are already registered for the next exam date, you will be allowed to proceed with the exam. If, on the other hand, you do not apply in time for your application to be reviewed by CASLPO for the next available exam sitting, or if your application has deficiencies or is incomplete, you will not be allowed to take the exam if you have registered for the exam before being deemed eligible. So we've come to the section where I will switch over to Sandra to share her screen and continue the presentation.
Okay, so as Colleen said, now we're going to discuss the actual application process. I'll be doing that, and then I'll be passing it back to Colleen to discuss the registration process. So, sorry. Okay. So as Colleen has mentioned, when you apply to CASLPO, the purpose is twofold. So first is to determine your eligibility for CASLPO registration. And the second reason is to determine your eligibility to enroll in the CETP exam. So these are the application requirements. So a professional master's degree in audiology or speech language pathology is required. And there's 3 criteria to determine whether or not it's a professional master's degree. So the first one is that the degree is recognized as equivalent to a Canadian master's degree as determined by an outside credentialing agency, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. The second criteria is that the program must be officially identified as a program whose intent is to train audiologists and speech language pathologists. And the third criteria is that the master's degree program must consist of coursework, supervised clinical practicum, and a research component. Another requirement is fulfillment of academic requirements, and this includes coursework and clinical practicum content and hours, which I will discuss in more detail in a moment. As Colleen mentioned, evidence of good character, evidence of language proficiency in English or French, and currency if you're interested in a general license. So currency is evidence of completion of a minimum of 750 hours of direct patient care or related work in the field of audiology or speech language pathology within the 3 years prior to submission of your application. So for example, if you submit your application in February of 2025, you would need to have completed the 750 hours between February 2022 and February 2025. So, where do you start with the application process? So after you've completed a professional master's degree in audiology or speech language pathology, or if your degree is in audiology from a US program in AUD, you must complete our online application, which you can access through our website, and you need to submit all the required documents and the application fee of $150. So to access the online application, this is just a screenshot of our website. So you would click on Applicants at the top, and from the drop-down menu, you would click on International and Non-Accredited Canadian Programs. you'll come to this page, which I'm assuming is where many of you found out about today's webinar. Then you would scroll down and you'll see many useful links. I strongly encourage you to read through all the documents under the section Read Before You Start, before you even start to fill out the application. There's also, you'll also find the button to click on accessing, how to access the, the actual access point of the online application. So below the button to access the online application, you'll also find links for the application guide and the online portal user guide. So the application guide is a long document. It's 46 pages long in length. I would recommend reading through it carefully, as it will help you to understand all the application requirements, including the documents that need to be submitted, what happens after you've submitted your application, and what's required for registration. This is the first screenshot you'll see in the online portal user guide. Considering having this document open as you're filling out the online application, as it's very helpful, it'll be very helpful to you in navigating through the application. And when you are in the online application, if you have any questions related to the online portal, you can contact international_grad@caslpo.com. So what are the required documents that are needed to be submitted with your application? This is a screenshot of where you can find the listing of the documents on our website. And under this link too, it will also tell you how you need to submit those documents, but I will go over that in a bit of detail right now. So you need to upload, these are the documents. So you need to upload a syllabus for each course you list in the coursework requirements section of the online application. You need you can submit evidence of eligibility to work in Canada with your application, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. And the following documents that are listed must be submitted, must be original submitted by the issuing institution. So they are the official university transcripts, the academic credentialing assessment, ACA for short, the signed summary of clinical practicum hours form, the signed verification of registration form, and language proficiency test. And again, the number 6 and number 7 are only if applicable, and I will discuss that a little bit more in a moment. So in terms of the syllabi, these are required so we have evidence confirming that each applicant has completed all the course hours and content requirements. So we ask that you provide a syllabus for each course that you include in the coursework requirements section of the application. So evidence of eligibility to work in Canada, what we require would be one of the following documents: Canadian citizenship or a permanent resident status document, or a Canadian employment authorization document. Now, if you don't have these at the time you're applying, you can still proceed with submitting your application. However, one of these documents must be submitted prior to your being registered. It's a requirement before you can be registered. So once you have evidence of eligibility to work in Canada, once you have one of these documents, then you can submit it to registration@caslpo.com. So official transcripts are needed from your graduate and undergraduate programs and universities where you took any courses relevant to the requirements. So CASLPO requires an official transcript to be sent to us directly from the university, and we do accept password protected official e-transcripts. So an academic credential assessment is required for each degree obtained outside of Canada. So CASLPO accepts this document from one of the following 3 agencies. So the World Education Services, International Qualifications Assessment Services, University of Toronto Comparative Education Service. We require the original document to be sent to us from whichever academic credential assessment service you choose to use. And note that if you choose to use WES, you do not need to request transcripts be sent to us from the university, as WES verifies the transcript and sends it to us. If you choose one of the other two agencies, you'll need to ask your university to send us a transcript. The summary of clinical practicum form needs to be signed by your program director or a designate. Photocopies are not acceptable, and paper versions must contain an original signature. And electronic copies are accepted if it comes directly from the program director's or the designate's work email address. So the other thing I just want to mention here is that if clinical practicum hours were obtained during both your bachelor's and your master's degrees, you must submit your clinical hours on 2 separate clinical practicum hours forms, even if you attended the same university for both degrees. The verification of registration and licensure form. If you are and/or were previously registered or licensed in another jurisdiction, you need to submit a verification of registration document. So this document needs to be submitted from a regulator, not an association. So for example, if you worked in the US state of Michigan, you need to submit a verification of registration form from the state regulator, not from ASHA. So evidence of English or French proficiency. So if the language of instruction of your professional master's degree was not English or French, you must submit a result from one of the following tests to meet our standard. Now, you'll find detailed information about our language proficiency standards on our website, and as well as the required scores for each of the listed tests, and links to each of the testing agencies can also be found in the application guide. So just in summary, the following documents must be originals sent from the originating institution. So your university transcripts, unless you're using WES for your academic credential assessment, your academic credential assessment, your clinical practicum hours form, and your language proficiency test result if required. Other documents may be sent electronically in PDF format to registration@CASLPO.com, or they may be sent by mail or courier to our address, which is here, but you'll also find that on our website and in the application guide. So, what are the coursework requirements? So in the coursework requirements section of the online application, there will be 4 coursework. There are 4 coursework areas of study. And there are 5 sections in total to be completed. So the 4 coursework areas are basic knowledge specific to the profession, basic knowledge related to other professions, disciplines, the minor professional area, major professional area, and then the content areas, which would be from the major professional area courses that you've taken. So in the next few slides, you don't have to write this information down because there is a handout that you can access that we've supplied for you. So for the basic knowledge specific to the profession, there are 2 subsections and a minimum of 135 hours is required. So for both speech language pathology and audiology applicants, 1 course is required in anatomical, physiological, and neurological basis of speech, language, and hearing functioning. And you will see that there's course examples beside each of these subsections to give you an idea of the type of courses that we're looking for. For SLP applicants, at least 2 courses are needed in the area of fundamental information pertaining to the use of speech and language processes. And for audiology applicants, 2 courses in the area of physical basis and perceptual processes of hearing are required. The next section, which is basic knowledge related to other professions and disciplines, there are 3 subsections requiring a minimum of 180 hours. So for both professions, at least one course is required in the area of psychological and social aspects of human development, at least 2 courses in basic principles and methods involved in conducting research in human behavior, and at least 1 course in professional practices and issues, administrative organization of speech language pathology and audiology services. For coursework in the minor professional area, a minimum of 45 hours is required of coursework. So this would be an audiology course for an SLP applicant and an SLP course for an audiology applicant, and at least 1 course is required in this section. So for the major professional area, a minimum of 405 hours are required. And in terms of the content areas for speech language pathology, evidence of completion of coursework in these 10 areas is required for speech language pathology applicants. And this information is all in the guide also, so you don't have to try and write it all down. And for audiology applicants, evidence of coursework is required in each of these 10 content areas. I just want to make note of the highlighted areas there because evidence of coursework completed in each of these sections, so selection and fitting, verification, and validation is required. And again, this information is laid out in the guide, and also there'll be explanations about it there. Okay, so in the online application, you will be asked to detail the following information about each relevant course: the course number, the course name, the total instructional hours, including lecture tutorial hours, which are counted at 100%, laboratory hours, which are counted at 30%, and problem-based learning hours, if you are in a problem-based learning program, are also counted at 30%. And again, see the application guide for more information. Be aware that you can only count a course work hour once, and you can list courses from both your master's and bachelor's degrees to meet the coursework requirements. However, it is expected that the majority of hours in the major area are from your master's degree. And remember that for each course you include in the coursework requirements section of the online application, you need to upload the course's syllabus. So how are hours determined? It's the number of hours per week for a course times the number of weeks in a semester. Or you can count the hours indicated across the weeks in the syllabus if the schedule is irregular. So for example, if you have a course that's 3 hours of lectures per week multiplied by 14 weeks, that would equal 42 hours, and that would be the total that you would enter into the online application. So please note that the final exam week of a course does not count in the total number of weeks calculation. And sometimes the number of coursework hours, you don't necessarily have to calculate it. It's sometimes found in the course syllabus and or on your transcript. But if this information isn't included, you may want to consider providing it in a different way. So for example, requesting a letter from the professor of the course. Okay, now we're going to get back to some of the other information that you'll find on the website. So this is, again, just a screenshot of where you go to find that. So you click on Applicants and then International and Non-Accredited Canadian Programs. So under Resources, we've already discussed the Online Portal User Guide and the Application Guide, but this is also where you're going to find the Clinical Practicum Hours form to be submitted to your program director, and the verification of registration form to submit to any applicable regulatory or licensing bodies. So I'm sure that an important question that you have is, how long does the process take? So This is just an overview of the steps in the process, and then I'll give you a little bit more detail in the coming slides. But first, you submit the required documents. Then there's the intake process where CASLPO staff ensures that all required documents have been received. Then your application will be in the review process. So the intake procedure. So you will receive automatic email updates after submitting your application and each day that you upload an additional document. Once you've completed CASLPO's online application process and paid the application fee, it will take up to 15 days for CASLPO staff to determine if your application is complete or if additional documentation is required. Once we've received all your documents, you will receive a ready for review email from the portal to let you know that your application is in the queue to be reviewed. So the review of an application may take up to 13 weeks to complete, and that's from the date of the ready for review email. And the complete application is reviewed by college staff to determine if all of the college's registration requirements have been met. And again, if you're eligible, then you may proceed to register with CASLPO and to enroll in the CETP exam with SAC. So if there are anything missing, so if there's a deficiency with your application, so let's say you're missing coursework or clinical practicum hours, or there's issues with the good character requirement, your application will undergo further review by CASLPO's registration committee. Now the committee meets quarterly, so this will increase your application time by 3 to 6 months. So there are after your application is reviewed by the committee, there are 4 types of decisions that a panel of the registration committee may make. So the first one is that there are no deficiencies, and the committee would then direct the registrar to issue a certificate to the applicant. Another decision could be that there are deficiencies, so the committee would direct the registrar to issue a certificate of registration if the applicant successfully completes additional training or examination as specified by the panel. Another type of decision would be that there are other concerns. So the committee would direct the registrar to impose specified terms, conditions, and limitations on a certificate of registration of the applicant. And the fourth type of decision would be that the registration must be denied. So the committee would direct the registrar to refuse to issue a certificate. Now, just a note about that, denial of registration is rare, and it may occur if an applicant doesn't have a professional master's degree in speech language pathology or audiology. So CASLPO must process applications as fast as possible and in the order each application is received in a completed form, as per the Office of the Fairness Commissioner of Ontario. Please do not call or email the college to find out your application status or to ask if we can expedite your application. Having to respond to these kinds of inquiries takes CASLPO staff away from processing applications and reviewing applications, and we cannot change the order of applications. And one final note, because of confidentiality, the college cannot provide information about an application to anyone other than the applicant without the applicant's permission. So we cannot talk to your parent, to your spouse, or your employer or a potential employer without your written permission. And misunderstood or distorted information by a third party can cause delays or errors in your application. So if you have a question about your application, please contact CASLPO yourself. Okay, so I'm just going to go through a couple of scenarios here. So this is a question we receive frequently about whether or not someone with a professional bachelor's degree in speech language pathology or audiology for that matter can be registered in Ontario. And the answer is no. CASLPO's registration regulation states that a minimum non-exemptable requirement is the completion of a professional master's degree in speech language pathology or audiology. And because it is exemptable, it means that the requirement cannot be waived or changed by any staff member at CASLPO or by the panel of the college's registration committee. So here's a scenario. She was concerned that her application package was not delivered properly. Should she contact the college to confirm the receipt of her application? So the answer is no. Once we've received an application, we send it, you'll get notification, as I mentioned before, within 15 days, indicating which documents have been received and if there's anything that's outstanding. And we won't be able to provide you with any information before that time. Here's another scenario. A potential employer for another applicant, Devika, calls CASLPO to say, I would like to hire this graduating student for a position we have. We need her to start in 2 weeks. Otherwise, the children at the center will not get the service they are entitled to. So is CASLPO able to move Devika's application ahead of others? And again, here the answer is no. We have to follow the Ontario Fairness Commissioner's requirement, and which means that CASLPO needs to provide an impartial, transparent, and fair process for all applicants. It would be unfair to other applicants who submitted their applications before Devika and who may also have a job planned with patients eagerly waiting for service from them. So once the college has confirmed in an email that the application is complete, applications are placed in queue for review, and we do not deviate from that order. So finally, what we recommend is that you plan ahead and submit your application as early as possible, and you discuss the application timeline and registration process with potential employers in order to manage expectations. CASLPO, as I've mentioned, CASLPO cannot fast track any applications, no matter the situation. Okay, and now I'm going to pass it back to Colleen to talk about the registration process.
All right, so after you've completed the application process, you are then moving on to our registration process. So we have 4 categories of different types of certificates at the college. We have the initial certificate, the general certificate, the academic certificate, and the non-practicing certificate. So most applicants, as they're going through the process, either apply for the general certificate or the initial certificate. So we're just going to kind of outline the differences between the two. So for general registration, it's for applicants who have met the academic requirements for registration and also have professional experience and have provided 750 hours of patient care or related work in their profession in the previous 3 years before applying for registration. We also require that general registrants have already passed the CETP exam. Initial registrants, however, while they have the academic requirements for registration, they might not have any professional experience at all, or they may not have provided 750 hours of patient care or related work within the previous 3-year period. As well, they may not have attempted the CETP exam yet. So you would be able to become an initial registrant if you are in that situation, and also the initial registrant, if you choose that stream, you have to complete the mentorship program if you're in, if you become an initial practice registrant. It isn't sufficient to choose the initial route. say you have the experience, but you choose to do an initial certificate and pass the exam during your initial practice period, and then want to become general immediately after passing the exam, you do have to complete your mentorship since you are an initial practice registrant before becoming a general registrant. So considering the timing of the CETP exam and registration. So if you are applying for a general license, you must successfully complete the CETP exam before your registration. If you are applying for an initial license, you have two options. You can successfully complete the CETP exam prior to your registration, or you may begin your registration and successfully complete the CETP exam during the 6-month term of your initial certificate. However, you should note that if you fail the CETP exam during that term of your initial registration, your initial certificate will expire and you must pass the CETP exam before you reapply. Also, if you take the exam prior to your registration and you fail the exam, we wouldn't be able to issue an initial certificate to you until you'd passed the exam. So with an initial certificate, to complete the registration process and to become an initial registrant, you must have an offer of employment in Ontario to work as either an audiologist or a speech language pathologist. And you have to have an eligible mentor lined up. So there are these steps associated with completion of your registration with CASLPO, which are part of the registration process. So the first being to complete the registration form, which will be sent to you upon determining that you are eligible for a certificate of registration. So when you are determined to be eligible, you will be told either if you're eligible for just an initial certificate, or if you are eligible to either register as a general or an initial registrant. So if you are applying for the initial certificate, you would complete the registration form, and it must be submitted no earlier than 3 weeks before your anticipated employment start date. We need to obtain the results of your CETP exam if you are applying for a general certificate. However, as an initial registrant, if you've completed the exam and passed, we would want to get those results. Or if you wish to start working but do the exam during your initial practice period, we would want to get the signed undertaking. So, this is just to say, confirm that a general certificate holder needs to provide evidence of having completed the exam successfully, and an initial registrant needs to provide us with that signed undertaking. The undertaking that you are signing will allow you to register for the, I guess, you can register, for an initial certificate prior to your sitting of the CETP exam. So, for instance, if you become registered on April 1st and there is a June exam, during the month of April, I guess you can apply to take the next available exam during that period. So you'd be prepared to take that June exam during your initial practice period. However, if you apply for registration on, or complete your registration on May 1st, you could not apply for the June exam anymore, because the time that you could sign up for it has passed, because it would end on April 30th. So then that person would be eligible for the next available exam, which would be the October exam, because that would be the next time that the window to apply for eligibility would open up and you would be able to take that exam. So I would just be conscious of the dates of those exams and when you would want to write them. If you want to write it as soon as possible, you have that opportunity to apply, and but there is that little bit of a window there. We ask that applicants sign an agreement to write their professions exam during that 6-month term of their initial certificate, and this agreement is known as the undertaking. And for both certificates, we do want confirmation of your employment start date. However, with an initial certificate, you must be employed. However, with a general certificate, you can be self-employed in order to start your registration. So with a general registrant as well, if they are not currently employed, they can still obtain a general certificate. However, they would have to designate an address as their place of employment until they have secured employment, or until they maybe start a private practice. We say that this is specifically more towards the initial applicant who is unsure of the date that they will start employment. And so if you're not sure, you could put into the employment start date part of that form pending completion of registration as a response, and that will allow us to proceed with your registration without a specific employment start date. Both the initial and general registrants, as I mentioned, do have to confirm a practice location and a business phone number as part of the registration process. And they also have to, if they haven't done it previously, when they are submitting their application, they must confirm that their eligibility to work in Ontario at the registration process. So again, the documents that we need are either proof of Canadian citizenship, proof of permanent resident status, or proof of Canadian employment authorization. We also require that you provide confirmation of professional liability insurance coverage. And I guess the information that we want to receive is the carrier name, the policy certificate number, and the expiry date of the policy. And the coverage required is $2 million per claim. You will find that some employers will provide professional liability insurance coverage as part of your employment package. Others will not, and you will have to research available coverage for healthcare providers in order to obtain that coverage. And the final piece of the puzzle is to provide the remaining fees for registration. So we require a registration fee and a prorated annual fee as the final fees. And the registration fee is $50, and the prorated fee is determined by when the proration occurs during the registration period. So our registration year runs from October 1st in one year to September 30th in the next. So our current registration period started on October 1st, 2024, and will end on September 30th, 2025. And we have a chart on our website which you can find the prorated amounts. For the initial certificate, we do need to get your mentor's name and the name of and email address of your human resources contact at every practice location where you are providing services. For the general certificate, we need to get a copy of, so we need to have your employment history, a declaration of practice recency, and a submission of a completed verification of employment form. So basically your declaration of practice recency, that's where you declare whether or not you've completed 750 hours of patient care related work within the last 3 years. The submission of your verification of employment form is where your employer verifies that in fact you have provided that 750 hours within the last 3 years. So once you have completed all of the remaining parts of the registration process and submitted all the required documents, it takes about 2 weeks to issue a certificate of registration. When your registration is complete, you will receive your CASLPO number, and you will be visible on CASLPO's public register. So you can see a portion of our website, and at the top you'll see that find a registered professional area. If you click on that, you'll go to our public register, and you'll be able to find yourself and download proof of your that you are registered for your employer, or your employer can go to our site and find you and confirm that you are indeed registered. So now you have your CASLPO number. You may use the title and begin working as an audiologist or speech language pathologist. So there are a couple important reminders to all CASLPO registrants. So the registration fee and the prorated annual fee payment, all CASLPO registrants are responsible for keeping their certificates of registration up to date, and CASLPO certificates expire on September 30th every year. So all CASLPO registrants must renew their certificates on or before October 1st each year. This includes newly registered initial registrants or newly registered general registrants. So just note that if you get married or if you get registered at the end of the registration year, say you get registered in the month of September, your certificate is going to expire at the end of September. So you do have to renew by October 1st in order to continue your registration and ensure that your certificate remains up to date. So some key takeaways that we want you to take back is that the importance of registration and licensure. Registration ensures that only qualified professionals can practice, and we say do not start practicing before you are issued a CASLPO registration number. Good character is a foundational requirement for registration and helps to ensure that professionals act in the best interest of the public. The CETP exam, you may apply to CASLPO and be approved as eligible for registration before you take the CETP exam. It is recommended that you apply at least 20 weeks before the next available registration date, if that's the date that you wish to, if that's the exam date that you wish to take the exam at. And also, when you're taking steps to become registered, we encourage you to read the application guide and review it carefully before starting your application. You'll be better able to understand the requirements in the process. If you submit your application online through or you should submit your application online through the registering portal. And within 15 days of submitting your application, you will receive an email confirming its receipt and listing any missing documents. The college will begin reviewing your application only after all required documents have been submitted and the application is complete. If you have any questions about international application, either the process or the requirements, please contact international_grad@caslpo.com. And for questions about the registration process, please contact registration@caslpo.com. So we will open up the floor for any questions, and we will go to our moderator to determine if there's any questions.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So we have lots and lots and lots of questions, which is wonderful. So we will not get to answer all of the questions during the webinar, but if we haven't answered your question during the webinar, we will answer it later by email. So just keep that in mind. We won't forget you. And some of us are writing answers where we can, but if they're super lengthy or more personal to your situation, we'll probably send a longer email. So I will get started. Two broad questions that aren't really about the application form, but more about the webinar. The handouts are not available right now in the webinar, but we will put them on our website shortly. So you will be able to access the handouts from the webinar on the website. And as well, this is being recorded, and the slides and the webinar will also be available on the website in a few weeks' time. So you'll be able to watch them at any point. Okay, now some more specific questions. I'll give this one to you, Sandra. I'm about to graduate from my master's program in the United States. Do I need to have worked professionally before I apply for registration with CASLPO? And I've gotten actually another question which asks, similar, do I need to complete the clinical fellowship year before applying to CASLPO?
Okay, thank you for those questions. We do get those questions a lot, actually. So for the first one about past work experience, no, you do not need to have prior work experience to become registered with CASLPO. We don't evaluate work experience as part of the application process, but as we've mentioned, work experience does come into play if you want to register with a general certificate. So again, you will need to provide proof of a minimum of 750 hours of direct patient care or related work in the previous 3 years prior to applying to CASLPO. And then the CFY, which is the clinical fellowship year that individuals attending schools in the US have the option to take. Well, I guess they need to take it if they're going to stay and work in the US. That is not needed to apply to CASLPO. So that's an ASHA requirement. It's not a requirement in Ontario to become registered with us. But if I guess in terms of those hours, if you have done a CFY, if you were employed as an audiologist or a speech language pathologist, and you were the professional responsible, the person who was accountable for all of the service provided to patients, you could use those hours to demonstrate your currency. So again, that's the 750 hours of patient care or related work in the previous 3 years. So I hope that that's answered your question.
I would just add, if I wasn't clear, the initial certificate is actually the certificate that you would apply for if you don't have any professional experience, while the general certificate is an option if you do have professional experience. So I hope that makes it a little bit clearer as well.
Okay. And I see the time. Do you want another question, or do you want me to hold it till later?
Let's do one more question before we take a break.
Okay, so this one we've had actually a few versions of this question. They're trying to figure out the course hours to match our form, and they say my transcript in the West shows it in credit hours. Is there a way to convert credit hours to coursework hours on our form? They're asking if there's a direct translation from credit hours to coursework hours.
Generally speaking, and again, this is usually outlined somewhere in your either on your transcript or in the syllabus. Generally, 1 credit hour is equivalent to one hour of coursework, or instructional hours, I guess. So three credits generally, but again, this isn't always the case. Generally, it would be the equivalent of 3 hours per week of instructional hours. So what my advice is to you is do the best that you can to get this information. And again, like I said, if you need to ask a professor to clarify it, you can give them the information that we require. You can take it right from the application guide and then ask them to respond to that in a letter, and then you can send that to us. But try and figure it out as best as you can, and then once we're reviewing your application, we will look at that and try and determine the number of hours. And we may come back to you with some questions, but that's generally how the process would work.
Okay. Thanks.
This is the last section of the webinar this afternoon that will go over information on CASLPO's mentorship program. Colleen or Sandra, if you're back, can you confirm that you're seeing my screen as expected?
Yes.
Perfect. Yeah, so this section of the presentation will go over the purpose and requirements of mentorship, an overview of the 6-month mentorship period, and a brief introduction to the mentorship self-assessment tool. We'll also go over some tips to facilitate a positive mentorship and the process for becoming a general registrant of the college after successfully completing mentorship. Finally, we'll review the answers to some frequently asked questions that we receive in the program. So CASLPO's mentorship program has been in place since 1994 and serves an important purpose related to the college's role and mandate. First, mentorship is a condition of an initial certificate of registration. Initial registrants must successfully complete mentorship before they can become general registrants of the college. To protect the public, the college develops minimum practice standards that audiologists and speech-language pathologists in Ontario must meet. During mentorship, the mentor assesses the mentee's compliance with these minimum standards and ultimately decides whether to recommend mentees for a general certificate of registration based on their understanding of and compliance with the college's standards. The mentorship program serves as an introduction to the requirements of the quality assurance program, which all general registrants must participate in. Mentorship provides initial registrants with the support of an experienced colleague to ensure they have the knowledge, skill, and judgment to practice safely. As regulated healthcare professionals, mentees accept responsibility for their role in maintaining the public's confidence in the profession's ability to provide safe, quality, and ethical care by engaging in the career-long process of independent learning, self-reflection, and evaluation of their own competence. As Sandra mentioned earlier, for anyone joining from the United States, CASLPO's mentorship program is not the same as the clinical fellowship year required for ASHA certification.
Sorry, Caitlin, I think your webcam is off.
Oh, let me see.
I can see. Oh,
There we go.
Yeah, thank you for that, Colleen. So starting your mentorship period. After initial registrants are issued their CASLPO registration number, they receive the mentorship program guidelines via email. Mentees should discuss the guidelines and details of the mentorship contract with their mentor. Things to discuss include your start date, which must be on or after the date you receive your CASLPO registration number, the process and requirements for mentorship, the logistics of meeting with your mentor, methods of evaluation and feedback, and identify a third party for conflict resolution. There are 3 important deadlines in mentorship that mentees are responsible for meeting. You must submit your signed mentorship contract within 30 days of receiving your CASLPO registration number. The mentorship period doesn't start until CASLPO receives the contract. That is what allows the mentee and mentor access to the mentorship self-assessment tool, or MSAT. In instances where mentees have neglected to submit a contract, any time spent in mentorship, patient care, or mentored guidance hours cannot be verified and therefore will not be counted. Once mentees gain access to the MSAT by submitting your contract, the due dates for the midterm and final evaluations are listed there. Midterm evaluations are due 30 days after the midway point, i.e. 3 months in mentorship, and final evaluations are due 30 days after the 6-month mentorship period to allow mentees and mentors enough time to fulfill the requirements for these evaluations. I'll describe those more in depth in the coming slides. Remember that as a regulated health professional, completing your mentorship period and demonstrating that you meet the standards of the profession is your responsibility. As a general registrant, there will be important deadlines that occur annually and incur late fees if they're missed. So during mentorship, the mentee must complete a minimum 6-month period of mentored practice, during which they need to provide at least 500 hours of patient care, receive at least 48 hours of guidance from their mentor, and complete midterm and final evaluations in the mentorship self-assessment tool. This slide provides a summary of the 6-month mentorship period. The first 3 months of mentorship focus on the professional practice standards and indicators. The midterm evaluation is done at the halfway point, and details on what this entails will be covered on the next slide. In the second half of mentorship, mentees continue to evaluate how they're meeting the professional practice indicators, improve their awareness of applicable legislation and regulatory standards, and engage in independent learning to achieve the goals set at the midterm. In the final mentor report, the mentor confirms you've completed 500 hours of patient care and received at least 48 hours of mentored guidance during the mentorship period, and indicates if they recommend you for a general certificate of registration with CASLPO based on observation of your practice and evidence that you're meeting the practice standards of the college. CASLPO will review the evaluation, and your certificate will be changed to general upon confirmation you've met all the requirements. So as I mentioned previously, midterm evaluations are due for submission in the MSAT 30 days after the halfway point in mentorship, which should be at 3 months. CASLPO provides this 30-day grace period to allow enough time for mentees and mentors to complete all the requirements of these evaluations. For the midterm, this involves discussing your overall progress during the mentorship period, determining a rating for all the indicators in each practice standard category, discussing and determining at least 3 learning goals, reviewing 5 patient records, using the clinical reasoning tool with at least 2 patient cases, and submitting the report in the MSAT. Mentees must also have completed at least 250 patient care hours or within approximately 50 hours of that, and received at least 24 hours of guidance from their mentor before the midterm evaluation. This amount of patient care allows for sufficient practice experience and reflection of the mentee's progress meeting practice standards. At the final evaluation, mentors and mentees discuss the mentee's overall progress during the mentorship period, determine a final rating for all the indicators in each practice standard category, review and approve the mentee's learning goals based on the learning activities completed, review 5 patient records using the checklist for chart review, use the clinical reasoning tool to conduct additional clinical reasoning discussions if it was indicated at the midterm, and submit the final report in the MSAT. And again, mentees must also have completed at least the minimum 500 hours of patient care and 48 hours of mentored guidance required by the end of mentorship. So please note that mentorship is not the same as supervision. During mentorship, you as a registrant of the college and not your mentor are accountable for your clinical work and decisions. Mentors are not supervisors, and mentorship is not supervised practice. So what does it mean to be accountable for your practice? It means that you're a professional who's expected and required to explain your actions and decisions. So professionalism is an attitude and personal philosophy demonstrated by a desire to always improve and learn, knowing your scope of practice and the limitations of your knowledge, leading when you're able, doing your best, maintaining professional boundaries, and always putting your patients first. Professionalism is also a set of behaviors, including being responsible, reliable, courteous, respectful, and accountable. So let's consider the following scenario to illustrate professionalism. Tanvi is an initial registrant who works as an independent contractor. Tanvi is told by a more experienced colleague that consent for assessment doesn't need to be documented in the patient record. This is incorrect. Consent for assessment must be documented according to CASLPO regulations and standards and the Healthcare Consent Act. Regrettably, a complaint is filed to the college that involves Tanvi. During the investigation, patient records are reviewed and it's confirmed that consent for assessment was not documented. Tanvi is asked to explain why they didn't document the consent, and their explanation is, I was told by a more experienced colleague that this wasn't required, so I trusted them and didn't question it. I didn't want to create tension in the workplace by asking this question. I was new and didn't realize this was wrong. So is Tanvi's justification reasonable? And the answer is no. Being naive is not a defense. To reiterate, being accountable for your practice means you are a professional who's expected and required to explain your actions and decisions. For example, doing things correctly and adhering to standards, even when it's difficult or might upset an employer if you raise questions. Regulated health professionals are expected to engage in self-reflection and evaluation of their practice. Principles of adult learning teach us that we're not always accurate or objective in evaluating ourselves, and that self-assessment is enhanced and more accurate with external input. This is the premise for peer assessment in the quality assurance program and for mentorship and registration. Mentors fulfill the important role of providing objective input on how mentees are meeting minimum standards of practice. A mentor's role is to provide guidance and support to help mentees reflect on their practice and apply standards, to improve mentees' competence commensurate with their career stage, to apply principles of sound clinical reasoning, to observe and discuss mentees' practice and how they're integrating standards for their professions, to provide mentees with general guidance on practice issues, and to submit reports of mentees' progress to the college. Some direct observation of the mentee's practice is mandatory, but the college does not set a minimum requirement. The amount of direct observation is at the discretion of the mentor and needs to be sufficient to be able to determine if you have the basic knowledge, skill, and judgment to practice competently, and to evaluate whether you as the mentee are complying with CASLPO's practice standards. This will depend on your experience, skills, and confidence, the risk of harm associated with the clinical activities, the practice environment. It's preferable that mentees spend consistent time with their mentors throughout mentorship. The college recommends mentored guidance be spread out over time and generally adhere to approximately 2 hours per week to reflect on how you're meeting standards in your clinical practice. The mentor must provide sufficient direct observation and guidance to be able to determine if you have the basic knowledge, skill, and judgment to practice competently and to comment on whether you comply with CASLPO's practice standards. Direct guidance includes activities such as the examples listed here. Essentially, it's direct guidance if the patient is present and all appropriate consents are needed. By contrast, the patient is not present during indirect guidance activities, and we've included some examples. So you gain access to the mentorship self-assessment tool when your mentorship contract is approved, and you and your mentor will use the MSAT to complete the activities listed on this slide. When you log into the MSAT, you'll see important dates for your mentorship along the left-hand menu and the timeline for mentorship, as well as sections with resources and guidance documents for using the tool. Instructions are available at the top of each section in the MSAT. This slide highlights where you will rate yourself on how you're meeting the standards, including providing your comments and uploading evidence to support your evaluation. On this slide, it highlights where the mentor completes their section with their evaluation and comments. Mentees and mentors each determine how well the mentee meets the overall practice standard category by rating the 30 practice indicators that are listed in that section. Mentors evaluate mentees based on a review of the comments and evidence that mentees provide in the MSAT. The MSAT has the following rating system for evaluating whether these standards are being met: meets the standard, needs work to meet the standard, or is not applicable. Rating should be based on the mentor's professional judgment, considering all comments and evidence that you provide in the MSAT, as well as time spent with you discussing and observing your clinical practice and providing guidance and feedback. Mentors and mentees should be honest and truthful when determining ratings on the indicators and standards of practice. The mentorship period is when you will have maximum support to bring your practice up to standards. It's not unusual for a mentor to assign a needs work rating for non-red flag indicators at the midterm. However, by the end of mentorship, mentees must aim to meet all the indicators and, by extension, all the practice standards. The intention is that a needs work rating submitted to the college reflects an issue meeting these minimum standards. So to that end, what are the practice standards? They're the minimum performance expectations of all audiologists and speech language pathologists practicing in Ontario in every practice setting. They're represented by the practice indicators listed in the MSAT. For example, indicator 1.2, I maintain records in a reasonable time that accurately reflect the services provided. And indicator 3.7, I use clinical reasoning at every phase of intervention. There are also practice-specific standards documents, like the provision of hearing aid services by audiologists, dysphagia standards for SLPs, and consent standards for both audiologists and speech language pathologists. While the term standard is applied to the indicators and documents sometimes interchangeably, the key point is that they all describe minimum practice expectations for the professions. The MSAT outlines the 5 professional practice standard categories for audiology and speech-language pathology, each containing several behavioral indicators that reflect the overall standard. Management practices has 10 indicators, clinical practice has 6, the patient-centered practice category has 7 indicators, communication has 5, and lastly, professional accountability has 2 behavioral indicators. As I mentioned previously, of the 30 practice indicators, there are 9 red flag indicators in the MSAT that have been deemed to be higher risk if not met early in practice and are therefore prioritized at the midterm. So they are 1.2 record keeping, 1.3 the controlled act of prescribing hearing aids, 1.7 following health and safety procedures, 3.1 maintaining or obtaining informed consent, 3.2 obtaining knowledgeable consent, 3.6 maintaining patient confidentiality, 3.7 clinical reasoning, 4.4 accurately representing professional credentials, and 5.2 professionalism. As a side note, there's particular emphasis on clinical reasoning during mentorship, and there are resources available on our website to support clinical reasoning and provide guidance on using the clinical reasoning tool. So now that we've completed an overview of the importance and requirements in mentorship, as well as how evaluations are completed in the MSAT, we'll provide some tips for ensuring a positive and beneficial mentorship experience. Approximately 220 to 230 initial registrants go through mentorship each year, and the vast majority of people do very well because we have committed professions. Some of these suggestions are things you can do when you're searching for a job and things to think about as you begin your mentorship. The last section of the presentation will review answers to some of the questions we field frequently in the program. So first, before you accept a job offer, take time to learn about the workplace or organization. Clarifying this information is important so that you have a better idea what to expect. Ask prospective employers what a typical workday looks like, whether there are experienced audiologists or speech-language pathologists on the team, what supports are available for new hires, and whether they've provided mentorship before. For example, if you're considering working at a private practice, it may be helpful to ask how consistent your caseload will be to determine whether you'll be able to get enough patient care hours and whether your mentor will be physically located at the same site as you. Your first job experience can have an important impact on the development of your career. You want to be in an environment where there's professionalism and you feel confident that appropriate practices are in place. The college regulates audiologists and speech-language pathologists. It does not have the authority to regulate employers or facilities where the professions work. It's important to research organizations and the professions working there to ensure they're reputable. As we've pointed out previously in this presentation, we encourage you to use the public register to search for audiologists and speech-language pathologists. And again, it can be accessed from our website. Ontario audiologists and speech-language pathologists are all listed here, and their listing will include details of their registration with CASLPO. So consider whether you'll be an independent contractor or an employee. You can negotiate or seek professional advice on contracts or verbal agreements before signing an employment contract. Ensure you're able to meet the standards of practice and your professional obligations. During mentorship, you'll be learning the standards, reflecting on how you meet them, and discussing this with your mentor. This happens in tandem with learning how to perform the expectations of your position. It's important to understand the process expected in your workplace for obtaining and documenting consent, and that they align with legislative and regulatory requirements. If applicable, make sure you understand the billing practices of your employer and that they adhere to the college's standards. Confirm that your information is only used for billing when you or someone you've supervised has provided the services, and that the billing system allows for an itemized invoice. Review the college's documents on record keeping and ensure that you understand the practices of the employing organization, including how clinical and financial records are stored and secured, and the procedures for release of information. Clarify whether you'll be responsible for supervising support personnel and that you understand your professional obligations by reviewing CASLPO's documents. And again, make sure that the billing system allows for the name and job title of support personnel on invoices. Ask your employer about their infection prevention and control measures and ensure that they meet the standards of the college. Practice advisors are available to help registrants meet their professional obligations and can be contacted here. Finally, be clear and honest about the support that you'll need to practice to the best of your ability. Difficulties happen when expectations are unclear. Indicate if you need further training or support in a particular area, and seek clarification if you're uncertain about anything. Remember that completing your mentorship and demonstrating that you meet the standards of the profession is your responsibility. Make the most of your mentorship by seeking peer support from your mentor and other colleagues, and approach your work with professionalism. So now let's briefly look at what happens after you successfully complete your mentorship period. Again, a general certificate of registration with CASLPO will be issued to you when you have successfully completed your mentorship, passed the CETP exam, and if applicable, fulfilled any outstanding orders issued by the registration committee. To maintain your general CASLPO registration, you must provide a minimum of 750 hours of patient care or related work in audiology or speech-language pathology during every 3-year period, which begins on the day that you are issued your general certificate. You will also need to meet the requirements of the quality assurance program, which are similar to mentorship. So the last few slides are frequently asked questions, so we'll go through them quickly, and I think should still have enough time allotted to take questions that have come in during the webinar. So the first question is, I work most of the time in a hospital, and that is where my mentor is. However, I also have a part-time job at a private practice. Can I have 2 mentors, one for each workplace? And the answer is no, mentees cannot have multiple mentors. To reiterate, the registration regulation requires that you must be mentored in all your practice locations. However, mentees can only have 1 designated mentor to complete and submit the evaluations in the MSAT. This is who should be listed on your contract. If you'll be working most of the time at the hospital, your mentor there should be your primary mentor. That person must be aware of the private practice work you're doing, but you will also need to arrange an eligible audiologist or speech-language pathologist at the other workplace to collaborate with your primary mentor. This clinician will speak to your primary mentor about your practice so they can accurately complete your evaluations that are sent to the college. The secondary audiologist or speech-language pathologist can also provide some of the 48 hours of mentored guidance. This arrangement must be discussed in advance and be agreeable to all parties, and the college needs to be notified of secondary audiologists or SLPs involved in your mentorship so that we can verify they meet CASLPO's criteria to mentor. So the next question, can I change mentors in the middle of my mentorship? So for example, you change jobs, your mentor goes on leave, etc. And the answer is yes, it's possible to change mentors during your mentorship period. It's important to contact the college early if you realize this will happen so that we can assist with the transition. To change mentors, you must submit a new mentorship contract, which will enable your MSAT to be updated with your new mentor's information. A written statement from your first mentor may be required depending on how far along you are in the mentorship period. If you know in advance that there's a possibility your mentor will go on leave, discuss whether it makes sense to start your mentorship with them and/or identify someone at the beginning who will be able to take over your mentorship, and CASLPO can verify that they're eligible at that time. This may minimize potential disruption or stress during your mentorship later on. So the last question is, I have not worked as many hours as I expected and will not have 500 hours by the end of 6 months. Will I be able to get an extension? Yes, you can request an extension to your mentorship. If you cannot complete the requirements of mentorship within 6 months, you would follow the process outlined here to request an extension. Ideally, you should submit this to the college at least 30 days before the report due date or end of your mentorship. CASLPO evaluates extension requests on an individual basis before they're approved, and you will receive an email confirmation whether your extension has been granted. A final note on extending your mentorship period. According to the registration regulation, extensions may be granted for an additional period of no more than 18 months. The college does not have the authority to extend the mentorship period beyond a maximum of 24 months. So in short, your mentorship cannot be shorter than 6 months and it cannot be longer than 24 months. And we grant extensions in maximum 12-week increments to make sure that people stay on track meeting the requirements. So the last couple slides provide you some resources to support you to be successful in your mentorship, and we encourage you to explore them on our website. The mentorship webpage, including the mentorship program guidelines in particular, have comprehensive information and details on the requirements of the mentorship period. If you have any questions or need clarification after reviewing these resources, we can be reached at mentorship@caslpo.com. So that brings us to the end of the content for the presentation, and I think we've allotted enough time to answer questions. So at this time, I will stop sharing my screen.
Okay, hello everyone again. So yes, lots more questions still coming in. So as I said, if we don't answer your question, either one of the speakers or in typed form during the webinar, we will send you an email with our answers. So having said that, let me get to some new mentorship questions. So this applicant is saying they are applying, but they don't have enough professional practice hours to get a general certificate. So they would probably go for an initial certificate with a mentorship. And so they're asking, previously they've worked, let's say 400 hours, and would they able to use the 400 hours that they've already completed towards the initial mentorship, or would they start the mentorship with 0 hours from the beginning?
So you can only count things towards your mentorship period that occur after you have become registered with CASLPO. So once you receive your initial certificate and begin mentorship, then you can count hours, which is a long way of saying, no, you can't count things that have occurred previously.
Yeah, I would add that as you're completing the mentorship process, you'll kind of realize that the process, while the accumulation of hours is part of that process, it's not the main focus of the process. So that's why, you know, it's really not applicable to the process of mentorship.
Absolutely.
Okay, and I have a very similar question that I'll just get you to clean up with that same, with a comment. If I complete my 500 plus 48 hours sooner than 6 months, should I still do 6 months of mentorship?
Yes, 6 months is the minimum required period stipulated in the regulation. So your mentorship cannot end before 6 months.
So people
Okay.
have more than the 500 hours, but not less, and not less than 6 months.
Exactly, those are minimums.
Okay, here's another question. Do you get paid during the mentorship program?
Of course, that's the requirement, that you must secure an offer of employment prior to becoming registered. So you do have to have employment to do your mentorship, and employment includes, of course, being paid.
Yes, your mentorship occurs while you're working. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, does your mentor need to be employed at your workplace? I think you talked about this, but I'll let you just answer this question. If you change jobs during your mentorship period, what steps must you take to ensure continuity?
Okay, so this is an interesting question. It is preferable that your mentor works at the same location that you do. It is possible, if that really isn't an option, to have an external mentor, but there are some important considerations if that happens, and you need to discuss whether it's feasible with your employer. So as I outlined, your mentor needs to observe your practice some of the time. Is that possible for somebody external to the organization? Your mentor needs to have access to patient records. Is that possible? Are consents going to be, are you going to be able to obtain consent as required? So these are all things to discuss in advance. The short answer is yes, it's possible, but it's really preferable if your mentor's at the same workplace as you.
Okay, let me see. I'm sorting through things and not very good at it. Okay, let's switch back to a question about an application. What happens if there's a delay in getting the good standing certificate, the verification of registration, from the licensing body? Would letters from my university and or my past workplaces be acceptable? Send that to Sandra or Colleen.
I'm sorry, the delay in receiving what from the
verification of registration?
Okay, and that is from an external regulator, I guess you're talking.
Sorry. Yes.
So,
sorry.
Essentially, what we're looking for is verification in the form that we have established. So we have a verification of registration form that we would require that regulatory body to submit. And if for any reason you find that you're not able to get the verification in the form that we would require, we have what's called alternative documents that could be submitted to replace that. And so, you know, your best thing to do is, if you're having real difficulties with obtaining the required documents, contact either Sandra or myself, and we'll help you navigate that process to get the alternative documents.
Okay, that's wonderful. Here's another question about coursework requirements. I worked as a communication disorders assistant, or CDA, in Ontario prior to my master's in the last 3 years. Do those hours count towards my 750 hours requirement? Sorry,
No.
that wasn't coursework, that was about professional experience.
Exactly. The hours that you do have to be as a speech language pathologist or an audiologist. So a CDA would not qualify as practice in speech language pathology.
Okay. Here's another question about the exam. After you pass the CETP exam, do you have to register right away to CASLPO if you don't plan on working in Canada right away? Or can you wait to register until you plan to start working in Canada? Thank you.
Absolutely. What we say is that you will have to become, you would have to submit an application to be determined as eligible to take the exam. And your application for registration, if you don't complete it within 2 years of submitting the application, or if you're going to if you go to the registration committee and they provide you with a deadline for completing your registration, if you don't become registered within that period, then the application expires. However, if you are still current at the time that you are reapplying for registration, you can use those same results from the CETP exam and reapply for registration. So, you know, I guess that would, that is just to say that your application, your current application will be active for approximately 2 years. And then if you say are away for longer than that 2-year period, you can reapply, but use those same test results, and they would continue to be active as long as you were, you had practiced within the last, we say 5 years before, I guess, submitting that new application.
Okay. Here's a question about, again, verification of registration. I had a registration from a licensing body outside of Canada, and I practiced as a speech pathologist then. However, I moved to Canada 7 years ago, and my registration is currently deactivated. Am I still required to get a letter from the licensing body, even though I'm applying to become a registered audiologist in Ontario?
Sorry, so you were
they
registered in Ontario, or?
They were registered outside of Canada as a speech pathologist, and that was, and now it's that registration is no longer current.
So we require registrations from any regulatory body that you're either currently or previously registered with. So that registration that is no longer active counts, and we would require that verification as part of your application.
Okay, and I see it's 2:59. I have one more question, perhaps. To submit my application form and other documents, do I need to submit my permanent residency status if I don't have it just yet?
No, so we would allow you to continue in the process if you haven't completed your immigration process yet, but we do require it before we issue a certificate of registration. So basically you can go through the process, submit your documents, have them assessed, and you could even do the CETP exam. But in order to be issued a certificate of registration, which would allow you to work in Ontario, at that point, you would have to have completed your immigration process.
Okay, we have more questions that we haven't answered, but we will answer those.
All right. So I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. We, as promised, we will provide a copy of the slides and the video recording in the next few weeks, and so and upload them to our registration website. And if you have any questions, the questions that we received in the chat, we will email you directly to respond to those questions, and that might take us as well a couple of weeks to do, but we will respond. So thank you so much for coming to our presentation, and we will definitely be available to answer questions, and I guess you can either email us at our main CASLPO@CASLPO.com, or we have provided a number of email addresses within the presentation that you can access as well. So thank you and have a good day. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.